Hello and welcome to everyone listening to the Written in Melanin podcast, the place where you come to get your weekly dose of melanated creativity. I'm your host, CM Lockhart, an author of fantasy books featuring Black girls who aren't all that nice, and the owner of the Melanin Library, an online database of books written by Black authors. And in this space, I share with you everything I've learned on my journey as a Black and indie author. I'm glad you're here. Welcome to a special bonus episode of the Written in Melanin podcast, you guys. Aleema Omotoni is here, and she is a British Nigerian author who writes novels that center Black teens coming of age, falling in love, and navigating all kinds of contemporary and fantasy worlds. She loves musical theater, astrophysics, and rainy autumn days, and she is also the author of the upcoming Everyone's Thinking It. And if you have not seen the cover of this gorgeous book, I don't know what you're doing with your life. I don't know what corner of book community you are in, but you need to see it. You need to get into it. And she is here today on the podcast. And y'all, I am excited. I'm thrilled. Aleema, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and inviting me on.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. Like, you have no idea how excited I am because when I saw your book cover, so admittedly, I'm in the United States, so we have a slightly different cover from the UK version, but either way, I saw it and I saw the melanin and I saw the fro and I was like, y'all better be doing the melanin on this cover. I am here for it. So anyway.
Yeah, no, every time people say they really love the cover, I always have to shout out the artist, Otesoya, who I actually met the other week, the first time at the UK launch. He is the sweetest person, so lovely, and he's amazing at what he does. So I always, shout him out every single time someone talks about the cover because he absolutely captured the essence of the story with his work. It was amazing.
It's absolutely beautiful, and we love a cover artist, especially one who understands the assignment. I'm excited, and y'all are going to hear me rant about this book because if you have not been following my channel on YouTube, like when the Melanin chat came back, if you haven't seen it, it's the first episode of season 4, so just go watch it. When I tell you I was ranting about this cover, even before I knew what it was about, I was like, oh my God, this is beautiful. This is gorgeous. And I was lucky enough to get an arc of the book, you guys, and let me tell you, the writing does not disappoint either. So slight plug in the beginning. Y'all know I usually wait, but slight plug in the beginning. Just go ahead and get the book. Go ahead and pre-order it. Just do what it does, okay? Do what it does. That being said, instead of me sitting here ranting about how much I love the book, I'm going to just ask you, can you introduce our listeners to what the book is about? Because it comes out September 5th in the United States.
Yes. So the book is Everyone's Thinking It, and it's my debut YA contemporary novel with a mystery. And it's sort of the reason why we call it a YA contemporary is because that's the only sort of neutral ground, because it's sort of a mishmash of a bunch of different genres. So I play with a little bit of romance, mystery, coming of age, all that kind of stuff. And it's essentially about these two Nigerian cousins, Iyanu and Kiton, and they're both they're at this boarding school in England, and one of them, Iyanu, is more of a keep to herself type of person, stay on the sideline. The other one, Kiton, is very much part of the popular crew, but it's it comes with a few unfortunate side effects, if you will. And it's the week before the annual Valentine's Day ball, and Iyanu, who is a photographer, takes pictures at one of the events leading up to the ball. And, the pictures get released with everyone's secrets, things about their relationships, their friendships, personal secrets about themselves. And everything sort of becomes chaos at the boarding school for that week, trying to figure out who did it. But, everyone thinks it's Iyanu. So,
I love that. And I love that you talked about how your book is more than just one genre, because I feel like as authors, sometimes we feel this pressure to just be like, oh, it's this one thing, this very specific thing. And one of the things that I like to talk about in books is everything, life happens all at one time. It's not like, oh, you're just falling in love and then everything else stops, right?
Yeah.
So I love that your book has aspects of all of it, and it's all happening at the same time, and they all have kind of the same level of priority. It's not one thing isn't overshadowing the other.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was definitely something that was important to me, because for me, I think it was just about centering these two girls, right? That was my main thing, because especially when you're dealing with complicated issues like this, it can sometimes become about the reader or the outside gaze. And in publishing, especially traditional publishing, that's typically like a white gaze is usually sort of where we want to kind of focus the story, like how, but for me, I was like, okay, what feels natural to this story and what serves the people I'm writing this for, right? And so I thought to myself, okay, let's focus on centering this relationship around them coming together. And what that ended up giving me was the opportunity. It naturally happened that like everything just sort of, I guess, balanced out with each other, because it wasn't about Ianu wanting to be with this person or Hiton trying to solve this friendship. It was more like, what are the obstacles they need to go through to get to each other? So I felt that it balanced it out in that way. So I'm glad that that came through, because it was a balancing act for sure.
And yeah. I love that you mentioned that it was more so focused on the girls coming together, because I also feel like it's one of those things where, how do I put it? It's such a weird analogy, right? And I don't know if y'all had this conversation in the UK, but when Frozen came out in the United States, people were talking about, oh, this is the first story where, it's about the sisters. And I'm just like, there are a lot of stories that's about way more than just finding a love interest. And I feel like your book is one of those that falls really neatly into that pile of like, it's about much more than just a love interest or just one, like I said, one singular thing. So honestly, I really am excited for all the things for your book and for everyone to get their hands on it and to like get into it, because I feel like it's going to be a good conversation starter for a lot of topics, especially when it comes to authors and looking at how writing can be done. At least that's how I look at books. I can't say anything for anybody else. I'm generalizing. Please don't come for me in the comments, you guys.
But thank you so much. I mean, ultimately, like, I just wanted the fullness of, Black girls and Black teen and Black girlhood experience. And, that does come with love, but it also comes with a bunch of other things, So, yeah.
Comes with so much more than just love. So absolutely. But you mentioned something that I kind of want to talk about and expand on, because on the podcast, I try to talk to authors of all different like publishing paths, right? And you have mentioned that obviously you're a traditionally published author with HarperCollins in the United States and then with Scholastic in the UK. So I'm kind of curious if you feel comfortable talking about it, like what your experience was like being a traditionally published author and what like your debut has been like, especially since, your book comes out in a couple of weeks. It's already out in the UK, but it's coming out in a couple of weeks in the United States. So what's it like, one, having like a dual release like that, but also just that whole process, because, the internet is wide and, the idea and the general vibe is that it's not a very easy thing to do, doubly so when you are a Black author writing Black stories for the Black gaze. So what's that been like?
So in terms of like having the dual release, it's been actually really helpful, just because there's been a lot to do, especially being, obviously I'm based in the UK, so I've had a lot to do here. And I just know for a fact that if I was, if they launched together, like maybe on the same day or in the same week, it would have been so stressful. So I'm so glad that they were like, okay, let's try and, you have like a 2-week buffer between the two, so I can sort of get to do things both here and then do sort of online interviews like this and other things with the US release. So that was great in terms of on that front. In terms of just going through the process of traditional publishing, I mean, for me, it was actually surprisingly, because leading up to that, I sort of, I had a lot of friends in the writing community. A lot of my friends are writers overseas, whether that's US or in Canada. And so, talking to them and sort of seeing what their experiences were like and how that's, played out, it helped me a lot, because I was able to learn and see how I could approach things and deal with things and, manage expectations and things like that. And I think because I sort of went into it not really expecting much, I don't know, it's surprised me and made me feel, I guess, a little bit more hopeful about it, because there is so much struggle in this industry anyway. And then on top of that, when you have all of these marginalizations, it becomes even more complicated. But I'm so lucky. I found 2 really amazing teams, and I hand that off to my agents, because I have my main agent, Claire, who's in the US, and then my UK co-agent Chloe, who's here at home with me, and they both found these amazing teams who genuinely were just like, this is a really cool, really fun story. You know this best, like you know this universe and this world best. We want to help you get that vision out in the best way possible for you and your readers. But at the same time, I had space to be like, okay, I can see what, for example, this note is trying to do and what it wants, and I get that, and I understand that that's quote unquote normal for stories like mine in the industry. But how about we try something slightly different? Because I think from the very beginning, like, I knew that this book was a mishmash of a bunch of different genres. So, you know, just talking to people and just getting all the different perspectives, I had a really great team in Alessandra and Caitlin who just held my hand throughout the whole thing and were like, okay, this would work well, but what are you thinking about it? And so I had a really great experience, and like I say, I owe a lot of that to my agents and just sort of, I guess, having advocates behind me in this that were really sort of, I don't know, they wanted what was best for me out of this situation, and I think everyone understood what I was trying to do, which was a huge part of me deciding who to go with. It's like, okay, who gets what I'm trying to do here? And thankfully, you know, we all kind of melded together quite nicely.
I'm so glad to hear that because, you know, having spoken to several authors over the last couple of years, it's always interesting to hear what the process is like. And it's different for every author. And I can kind of tell when I'm speaking to authors now how it seems to be on an uptick and like the experience being better and having that support, because that's one of the things that like I heard you mention several times. It's just like having the support and having advocates behind you. And I've heard many a time that it's like when you get into traditional publishing, it's about the team behind you and what they are willing to do for you and like fight for. So I'm really glad that you had a really good team and that you also have a community, because that's something else that I'm huge on this podcast and just in general. Like as authors, we need community. We need other people. And that's one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you about, because one of the things that I try to talk about on the podcast and just like on my platform in general is like when you're picking your community, it's kind of important to look for people that you vibe with, because every community is not necessarily your community. Exactly. So since you, objectively speaking, you know, everybody has their own definitions, but like, you know, outside looking in, you know, you've reached this level of success. What would you say for our listeners who are looking for a community? Do you have any like tips or suggestions or things to keep in mind?
I mean, I would say, firstly, it's kind of looking at, I guess, passion, but it's not necessarily just about passion for success or passion for like, you know, the biggest, splashiest hit. It's like passion towards this really, you know, telling stories, just the people who really feel like there's power in storytelling. And, you know, when I think about, you know, my own kind of like Nigerian tradition, like storytelling and things of that nature is so important. Oral history is a big thing. And so I think for me, it was seeing, you know, these are people, even if we were writing different genres or things like that, it's like people that wanted to, and, you know, and passion can show itself in different ways. It isn't just like talking about like your book in like an excited way. It's also kind of like, oh, how do I help other people in this space? Or how do I kind of learn how to do this? And who can I talk to about things, right? It's about communication, and it's about wanting to grow together as opposed to just all the other things one would think it just is. So I would say that, and at the same time, kind of holding on to what you are trying to do with your work. And then I would say in terms of practical steps, get involved however that you can, right? So that's whether that's on social media, whether that's joining local writing groups. And, you know, in my experience, I find that a lot of writers, especially a lot of us that are kind of, you know, just starting out, a lot of us do are quite open to finding community and want to link with people, especially when it does come to being Black women in this industry. It's like, okay, who can I speak to? And then after a while, you just sort of, a friend of a friend of a friend will be like, oh, I'm writing a similar thing. How about we bounce ideas off of each other? And then suddenly your community starts to grow, and you have different people that you help with different things and that help you with different things. And yeah, I think, but ultimately what I would say is just try and lead with a sense of care for the craft. And that typically helps. That's what helped me anyways. Yeah.
Honestly, I second all of that, especially that part where you were like, find people where you can grow together, because something that I feel like, especially like you said, as Black women on the internet, and navigating the world at large, it's not always a safe space. So definitely align yourself with people who are going to be a safe space, and also if you have that kind of energy where it's like, if I open a door and you can come through, I also want you to, like, if you go through a door, to leave it open for me and not like slam it in my face. And to, especially, in a world where it's just like, sometimes you get this idea or the stigma that, you're pitted against each other, and, two of you cannot be successful at the same time. Put yourself in spaces where that is not the mindset, where it's just like, no, we're all going to be successful. There's more than enough room at this table for everyone to sit. And so definitely look for people who, like you said, have that also like aligning passion. I talked about this in previous podcast episodes. I will continue to talk about it. You want people who have similar ambitions, and I'm not going to say necessarily goals, because success looks different for everyone, but like similar ambitions in that, like I said, if you're trying to be a full-time author, if you're trying to be, make this a career, you might want to surround yourself with people who also want to make it a career, versus someone who just kind of writes on the weekend as a hobby. It kind of makes, I'm not saying it makes a difference, because people's heart can be in the right place, but sometimes when you need that extra push, when you're up at 2 a.m. trying to write this chapter, or rewriting it for the 8th, 10th, 12th, 100th time to try to get it just right, to tell the story just the way you want to, sometimes you need that person in your corner who's also in that same space, who understands the work ethic and the ambition and what you're trying to achieve. And sometimes it makes a difference when they're like, okay, if you're up, I'm up. We're going to do this together,
Real.
So definitely, like you said, also put yourself out there, talk to people, because most people are a lot kinder than we sometimes give them credit for, but also listen to your gut, because like I said, the internet is not always a safe space. So if you feel funny, it's probably hilarious. You should get yourself out.
Exactly. And I think, like, ultimately, and this is what you mean about, like, that thing of leaving the door open and there's enough room at the table, because there is a way that things have been done, right? That have often been established by systems that do not have us at heart, right? And so I feel like when we're trying to make it in this space, or we're trying to grow together, it's understanding that we don't always have to do it that way, not just because that way is bad, but because it doesn't work for us as well,
It doesn't work for everyone.
Exactly. So I think it's just, people are a lot more open than you realize, and I think joining this community has taught me that a lot, many times. But like you say, trust your gut and just follow what feels like it's, on the up and up, that kind of thing, that feels right.
Absolutely. And look, I could probably talk to you forever about like how to navigate this writing world, because I feel like there's so much to it, especially when whether you're indie, self-published, whether you're traditional, what have you, there's so much to it about finding community, about trying to achieve your goals and your ambitions. But this is also about you. So we're going to pivot just a little bit, because I do want to talk specifically about Everyone's Thinking It, especially one of the things that grabbed me when I read the description for it, which was it's Mean Girls meets Dear White People. And I was just like, first of all, part of me was like, okay, we're talking about the movie Dear White People and not the series, right?
Yeah. So for me, it's like, the series is its own thing. I think the first season was probably the best in terms of like what it gave us, but I would say so it's more about like the energy of like that original concept as opposed to what it became.
That's fair. And so for those who have not read the book, I'm curious about like what part of those two things kind of inspired your work for, like I said, for those who haven't read it, because it's like those are two things. Like immediately when I saw it, I was just like, this makes sense, but also I'm curious about which parts of those things like inspired your writing and inspired the story, because first of all, those are two very iconic movies for very different reasons.
Yeah. So for me, with the Mean Girls side, it was more kind of because, so I wrote this book in 2020. So I was at uni and it was 2020. So we all know what that was like. And I needed an escape. I was like, okay, I want something that's going to be fun and cheesy and just vibrant and just that I could stick my teeth into and just escape a little bit. So naturally what came to me was like the classic sort of 90s, noughties teen movies. And so things like 10 Things I Hate About You, Clueless, Mean Girls, things like that. So that was the energy that was coming from the Mean Girls side. It was more kind of like, okay, girls being girls, why not? Whatever that means for anyone. And how would that play out if it's Black girls at the center? What if I deconstruct what it means to be popular and what that could mean in terms of what you're giving up or what you're gaining? So that's what I got from that space. And I remember really loving, especially with something like 10 Things I Hate About You, that, you know, she finds, well, hang on, is this a spoiler? It's quite an old film.
If you have not seen this movie from the 90s that came out like 20 years ago, I'm so sorry that we're going to spoil the ending for you.
Yeah. So, you know, she finds out that, you know, you know, it's all like set up, I guess. And I thought, okay, what happens if that happens at the beginning of the film, right? Because we don't get to really see the coming back together of Kat and, oh, his name has escaped me.
Love interest.
We'll go with love interest.
Yeah, I don't remember his name.
Heath Ledger we love, so, but yeah, we don't get to really see how that comes to, because obviously it's a film, so you don't get to see that sort of coming back together relationship. So I thought, okay, what happens if he finds out that at the very beginning? How, and can they come back together? So that was what inspired me in terms of Kitar's sort of like love story. And then when it came to the Dear White People, it was like, okay, I want all this fun, but once I'm centering Black girls, there's a truth to it that I experienced, that my cousins experienced at boarding school, and all of these things that I do want to explore. And in something like Dear White People, whether that's ideas about race and class and sexuality, all of those things, you know, there's no one way, right? There's no one way that a Black person can decide to handle that and navigate those spaces. And so I think that piece, you know, it doesn't really pose one answer or one type of way of doing things. And so that was the element I got from that. And also kind of the fact that these are Black girls, Black people who are in this white space that is quite bottled, right? In their case, it's like a higher education, and with this, it's boarding school, and they're all from 17, 16. So that was sort of what I thought was happening. And then as I was building, because I had the idea for it, and initially Iyanu was like the main character. Kitan existed as well, but she didn't have a POV when I first came up with the idea. And so for Iyanu, like it was this situation where, oh, what would happen if like she gets blamed for this thing she didn't do, and how would she handle that? So I knew that there was a fun chaos there, and ultimately I was like, okay, let me play with this concept and put it together. And that's when, as I was building the characters and the plot, that's when the Midsummer element came in. So Midsummer Night's Dream is all about like, you know, people falling in love with the wrong people. You know, one day certain people like each other, and then something happens, magic in the case of the play, that changes that completely on its head. So I wanted to explore that theme as opposed to retelling Midsummer Night's Dream. And so I was like, okay, this is an interesting theme. So ultimately it became, you know, a loose reimagining of A Midsummer Night's Dream if Shakespeare grew up watching Mean Girls and Dear White People. So that's what ended up, I was like, that's what we're going to go with. And it just sort of bloomed from there, really.
Honestly, there was so much in there that I loved. Most recently, this is if Shakespeare had grown up watching Mean Girls and Dear White People. It's like, okay, that's a selling point for a book if I've ever heard one.
Yeah.
I think we'll make that the title of this episode. What if Shakespeare had grown up watching Dear White People? That's the title of this episode.
Sounds great.
But also, you talked about, the fact that, you can be in a very white space and as a Black person navigate it very differently. And that's one of the things that I loved about the book from the very first chapter is that Iyanu and Kitan, is that how you say your name?
Yeah, Kitan, but Kitan works as well.
I love that they navigate that space completely differently, where Iyanu is very much on the outside of it. Like, she's there, but she's more so like an observer, and like you said, keeps to herself, kind of minds her business, is like, I have my own goals, and she's not really not integrating, like immersing herself in it the way that her cousin is from the very beginning. Because like from the first chapter, she's noticing like, oh yeah, she's got on her wig and she's very much trying to make sure that like she looks the part for this matchmaking. And it's like you see the difference in them immediately, so that when you get to her perspective, it's like you already have somewhat of an understanding of the kind of person that she is, but not in a judgmental way, but in just they navigate this space completely differently. And as someone who has grown up in predominantly white spaces, I know it's probably different in the UK versus the United States, but it's like everybody handles it differently, and sometimes the only way you can survive is by picking one or the others. Sometimes it's just like, I have to be on the outside, like that's some white people stuff over there, like I'm gonna stay in my lane. But then other times you kind of have to be like, okay, in order to survive this space, I have to make friends, I have to have some allies, I have to have someone in my corner. So it's kind of interesting to see them on both sides of it, and I think you navigated both their perspectives really well, which kind of brought me to something else that I wanted to ask you, which was, you mentioned that, Katan, I hope I'm saying her name right. In my mind, I read her name as Kit. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. No, that's also a nickname for the full name. So the full name is Oreoluwa Kitan, and so you can call, it would be pronounced Kitan, but I guess with a sort of American accent, it would be something like Kitan or something.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm so American in country. I'm so
okay.
sorry.
No, it's completely fine. Like, the thing is, as long, because, and I think, Kitan says it in the book as well. She's like, my name pronounced correctly in, a British accent is fine, like it works. But there's just something about the base once it's got like the Yoruba inflection. So she's cool either way. So I think you're fine.
Okay. Thank you for the forgiveness. But I know you said like she wasn't meant to be a primary perspective of the book at first. So from an author standpoint, I'm kind of curious, like, at what point did you realize that A, she needed her own perspective, and then 2, what was the challenge of writing that? Because I also have a book that's split in dual perspectives, and I was just like, oh, okay, you need a voice too. This is going to be interesting, because especially when they have completely different mindsets and experiences that shape them. Like, what was that like for you? So yeah, what led to it, and then how was it?
So I realized that she needed her own perspective hilariously late. So I had written approximately 50 or 60,000 words.
Oh.
And yeah. And I was like, it was one night, I was just sitting around and I was like, wait a second. What if? And then literally, I stopped writing. So, and this is the reason why I love outlining. Like, it's so helpful for me because it's so freeing, because it gives me a bird's eye view, right? Because I have a roadmap, and once there's a roadmap, it can change however it needs to when it needs to. So, I was 50,000 words in, and I was like, wait a second, what if? And then I stopped writing where I was, and I went back to the beginning, and I filled in her perspective, and I rewrote chapters that needed to be her. And there's this is a spoiler, so I won't say it. But essentially, something happens that you don't get to see in one perspective, but then you get to see in the other perspective. And I don't know if you've clocked what I'm talking about, but something happens and I was like, oh, that would work so well. And so that's what ended up happening. But she actually didn't end up having as many chapters as Ianu did by the time we went on submission, because we thought it was fine. Like, the story was great and it sold, so thank God. And then my editors, Alessandra, she was one of the people who really wanted to like dive more into perspective, and so it was great because she's like, oh, I want even more longing, I want even more of this, and I was like, sounds great, let's go for it. And so through the process of kind of developing developmental edits, we did a couple of rounds of that, and then the chapters that she did have grew even more, and then we added even more, and it was great. And then there she was, because ultimately she existed as she did, but we just didn't see what was going on in her head on the page. And once we got that, it was like, yeah, let's go for it. But it was a challenge. I would say it wasn't until like the second or third round where I was like, okay, I'm sitting in her skin even more, because these two characters are so different from me. Like, they exist in such a specific way than I did at school. And so it was such a fun challenge. I had someone ask me recently, like, what was the experience of sort of researching for this book? And, the actual boarding school element of that, all of that was like, oh, great, because I went to boarding school. So all of that was pretty, like, in the DNA. It was more figuring out how to write these two girls in a way that felt authentic and felt genuine and felt like I was honoring their choices and making them feel like they weren't bad people for what they did necessarily. It was more growing up, and how you handle that. Yeah.
And I feel like, especially when you're writing young adult, I feel like it's so important to hit that sweet spot of you're making mistakes, but they feel like authentic mistakes that help you grow as a person, versus that very, very, very irritating aspect of YA where it's like, oh, we're making mistakes because plot. We're making mistakes because this needs to happen. And I feel like when you are, like, as an author, are being true to who the character is and the type of ways they would navigate given the situation, I feel like that lends to, I don't want to say an authentic story, but at least to a type of story where as a reader, you're left feeling satisfied and you're not left feeling completely frustrated with the book where it's just like, this character would never do that. Everything that I've read about this character leads me to believe that they would not do something like this, And so the fact that you, like you said, you sat in her skin and you were like, you wanted to be authentic to her character, I feel like they give so much more meaning to the things that happen in the book, because it's like, this wasn't just thrown in there for the sake of being thrown in there,
Yeah. It was just, and it really occurred to me, I was like, people are going to read her from Ianu's perspective, not necessarily because Ianu hates her or anything, but they're going to read her without seeing inside of her mind and really, really dislike her. And there's so much to her that, and I guess this is something that I relate to with Ianu, like, she needs, as unfortunate as her choices are throughout the book, she needs someone to look at her and be like, okay, I'm going to love on you for a second and pull you closer, and so that way you can feel like you can be yourself, because she knows who she is, and she knows, like, she's very aware of what's going on, but she's kind of sad. It's almost like once you get on a train and you can't get off and you're like, well, here I am. And you just,
we're going where it's going,
and so she's following this journey, and based on who she is, there's reasons why, Ianu, she was born in Nigeria, but she's been living here since she was much younger. So she knows what it's like here. Kitara's an international student. She doesn't really know how to sort of navigate the space. She's learning, she's figuring it out. And in that sense, I sort of appreciated where they were coming from, because I sort of had like an amalgamation of their experiences in terms of my living here. So it was very much, so I'm glad that came through. I'm so pleased, and thank you, because she's a baby.
And it's very much a growing experience, and I think that's also important to remember about YA contemporary. Like, as you go into the book, they're growing, they're babies, they're children, they're children. You know, so like love on them and understand that like they're growing, you know, especially if you're picking it up as an adult. Like, for one, let's keep in mind we're not the target audience, you guys. Okay, this is for teens. Okay, but also keep in mind that, you know, they're not going to act like adults, you know, and I think that's something to keep in mind, both as a reader and also as an author who, if you're trying to write young adult, just remember that like the way you think now in 20 plus, 30 plus, whatever, is not the way you were thinking when you were a teenager. You know. And then also the whole concept of like, you know, when you're a teenager, everything that happens to you is like the worst thing to ever have happened, because you have not lived long enough for it to not have been the worst thing to ever happen to you. So kind of moving in that space. And like I said, I think your book does so much of this well. So I'm really excited for people to get into it, to pick it up, and to like, I don't know, just take something from it, whatever you need from it, you know? That being said, I do want to know, like, we've talked about all the great things. What would you say was the most challenging part of both writing the book and then also just the publishing aspect of debuting?
The most challenging part of writing the book, I would say it was Kiton. Like, her whole thing, I needed to find that balance of, you know, she's a kid, you know, and she's struggling, and just settling into her mind and writing in a way that didn't feel like I was condemning her, even if I was in her perspective. So it was getting that balance right of figuring out what that meant. And it's so funny because to some extent I also felt that people might not like Iyanu either, because she's very sure of what the world is and she knows what she needs to do. And I find that people might not have patience for a character that they don't see grow in that way. Iyanu is growing in a different way. Like, she knows her mind and she knows what she wants the world to be and how she moves through the world. But
can we pause for a moment and just focus on that? People do not like it when a character, especially a Black woman, knows her own mind and she is not growing into to be someone different than what she currently is. And I find that to be so interesting, because if you take away her melanin and you take away the way she navigates, when you have that in any other character, it's praised. Like, oh, she's confident, oh, she's strong, oh, she's, you know, strong-willed, oh, she's ambitious, she's driven, she knows what she wants. But then when it's in a Black woman, it becomes, oh, she's problematic, she's stubborn, she is unwilling to see things, to da-da-da-da-da. And I just find that so interesting. So if you are listening to this and your mind jumps to, oh, why isn't she growing as a character? I just want you to take a minute to sit with that thought and ask yourself, why is it such a bad thing if a character knows her own mind, if she knows what she wants, if she knows what she's after, if she's driven, if she's ambitious? Because from the very first page, when you meet Iyanu, she knows what she wants, she knows what she's after, she knows what she's trying to do, she knows why she is at this boarding school, she knows. And that's something that, personally, as a Black woman who also was very ambitious and knew what I wanted from a very young age, even if I didn't go the route that I thought I would, it's nice to see that in a character. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's totally fine. I'm glad that you said that, because that's exactly it. She's growing in the book in a completely different way. She's not. Kitan's growing into someone new. Iyanu stays who she is, but she's growing to experience the world in a different way that I can't spoil. But that's what I wanted to do with her. I wanted her to kind of grow in that way, I guess. So I'm glad that because it did worry me, because I know that a lot of people want to see characters change, and she doesn't change in her essence, but she grows. We'll say that. And then the second part of the question was what was hard in terms of publishing publishing, how overwhelming it can be. It was whirlwind. It was very much, things change so quickly, and I get really anxious quite easily. And so it was kind of like, what is going on? And it's so strange because when something good is happening, you expect your response to be, this is amazing. And I hope that there's someone out there who gets it when I say that it was kind of terrifying. It was sort of this, I'm actually going to be editing my book with an editor and it's actually going to be published. And this is a thing that's going to happen. And it wasn't about how people would receive it, because I think, as somebody who was in musical theatre, criticism and people not liking things that you do is, thick skin here. I can handle that kind of thing. It was more about reality shifting, because you spend so long wanting to get to a place of, having an agent and publishing your book and things like that. Having it happens because you have no framework for that. You feel unmoored. Well, I felt unmoored in a way that I wasn't really sure if I could handle that. So I would say that was the difficult part for me, but I hope that makes sense. And I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it was quite a strange experience.
No, I'm glad that you touched on it, because I feel like it's exactly like what you said. Like, when good things happen, that automatic response from the outside is like, oh, you should be happy. Like, this is what you wanted. Like, you should just be over the moon. And it's just like, I am one of those people where I will always say that emotions can coexist, that two things can be true at the same time. And you could be over the moon about something, but also still terrified about it. And I don't know if this is like a singular experience for me, but it's kind of like if you're sitting in an auditorium full of people and then someone calls your name for an award. And it's just like, yeah, you're excited because they called your name. You have been chosen, but also that means like that anxiety of now everybody's watching me. Now I have to get up and go on stage and accept this award. And now I'm in the spotlight. And now there's so many opportunities for things to go right, but there are also so many things to go wrong. Like, I could literally trip and fall and bust my face. What are they going to do? Laugh at me? And like that, it's very different as like an adult in a career sense, but like also at the base level, that's kind of the feeling of, what if this doesn't go the way that I wanted it to? What if things go so far left and I don't know how to recover from it? But also, I'm excited. This is what I wanted. Exactly. They called my name. I'm going up there. This is my moment. So I think it makes perfect sense. And I hope that our listeners who are tuning into this conversation also understand and kind of understand that, like, when you are pursuing a dream, a goal, a career in writing, there's so many levels to it. And if you feel anxious, if you feel overwhelmed, if you feel, like you said, terrified, you're not alone. It's not a strange feeling. You're not crazy. It's just a part of the process. I think that what matters is kind of like how you deal with it. If you let that fear kind of stop you from continuing on, like, don't let the fear of being great keep you from being great, type of thing,
Yeah. And I think ultimately it's all of that, and then the added thing of, but can I do it? Was it a fluke? Do I do it? How does this work? Do I have the skill sets? And I'm here to tell you that you wrote the book. Okay, if you're listening to this, you wrote the book and you can do it. And it happens at every single level. I have spoken to authors of all different shapes and shades and levels, and every book you write, you're gonna feel like you've completely forgotten how to do it, because the process of writing a book is learning how to write a book. So you did it once, and I'm telling you, you do it again. If you want any actionable steps, one thing I do is, when I have a period of like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, and when I finally solve the problem, if you will, I record myself a little voice note and say, dude, you did it, listen to this when it happens again. And then when it happens again, which it will sometimes, I just go listen to it. And when I hear my own self and I remember that feeling of being like, hang on, I was so right, it makes it easier as time goes on to sort of rebalance yourself in that sense. So there we are.
I just need you to know, like, what you just said resonated with me, because one of the things that, for me, like, personal experience, like when I wrote my first book, We Are the Origin, and I got to hold it in my hands, and I was like, okay, I did this. I kept the very first copy of the print, and I wrote myself a little note, like, and when I sign my books, like through my website when I'm selling it, I always number them so that, it's vanity. I'm not gonna lie, because I'm like, okay, one day when I'm like rich and famous, these numbered copies are gonna be worth money, right? But also, like, my copy is number 0, right? Because it's for me, and in it, I wrote myself a little note to be like, hey, like, you did this. This is the work of like your imagination, your hands. Like, you did it once, you can do it again. And like, whenever I'm feeling like, I don't know if I could do this, like when I was writing the second book in the series, and now I'm working on the first book of a completely new series, and that struggle of like, how did I do this the first time? What am I doing? Becomes like, you feel like an infant learning to walk every single time you stare at a blank page for the first time. And in your mind, you're like, okay, but I know how to run. Like, I know this, but you're still back at the beginning. And sometimes you just need that reminder. And so I'm of the mindset of, like you said, like you do for yourself, like you make voice recordings. I keep journal entries. Like when I have a really good writing day, I take a screenshot and I put it in like a little journal for myself. And I'm like, hey, look, you did this. Like on this day, you beasted it out. You wrote like 6,000 words in one sitting, and you kept most of them, like, don't let your anxiety and your fear of success keep you from being successful. So I don't know, what you said just like really resonated with me. So if you're listening to this, I encourage you to like not let those voices in your head get the best of you, and just listen to the one that's telling you that you can do it. Listen to my voice telling you right now that you can do it. Like if you're listening to this podcast, that shows that you already have some level of commitment to it, because you're seeking out other professionals who are talking about it to give you advice. So listen to us. Trust us, not your fear, and sit down, let the words flow, and trust yourself in your process. And understand that if your process is different from everyone else's, that's okay too. Aleema likes to outline. If you've heard this podcast and this is not your first episode, you know that makes me cry on the inside, because I cannot write an outline to save my life. I am not an outliner at all. I'm like a bullet pointer. Like my entire outline can fit on like a single page.
No, but but this is the thing, and that's what I love about this, and talking to other writers and sort of seeing what the process is, because sometimes certain stories, and this is kind of that thing that I was saying before about when you find community, is like sometimes when you're writing a specific type of book, the way that you usually do it might not work. A long several thousand word outline is what I usually do, but that, who knows, there might come a story that's like, hang on, that's not gonna work for this. Maybe it just needs some bullet points of like what needs to happen on one page. So I think everyone's process is their process, and I think you don't know what you might need in the future. So 100%.
And also just being open to it, because for this new series that I'm working on, I have more of an outline for it than I did for the first 2 books that I wrote, simply because I learned from the first 2 books that I wrote that if you're going to write a series, you should probably outline some things before you get into it.
Also that, yeah. But no, it's a process, and at the end of the day, you're the one getting this story out there, and what works for you is the best course of action for you.
Absolutely. So that being said, you guys, we are coming up in an hour on this podcast, which is kind of crazy. It's gone by so fast. But we are going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. So I have a couple more questions for you, and then I'm going to take us out. So the first one is, can you share what is coming up next for you?
So I have another book coming out soon. I'm not sure yet, but it was a 2-book deal, so I've been working on book 2. It's not a sequel, but it's a similar sort of vibe, another cast of characters, queens, centering Black girlhood, because that's just super important to me. And yeah, it's an exciting one. I really like the concept. I'm not sure what I can share, but I hope everyone can enjoy it, and everyone enjoys this book when it comes out. We'll see what happens.
Yay, I'm excited. Okay, and the last thing is the question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, which is, what writing advice would you give to any new authors starting out on their writing journey? I know we've given a lot of advice already, but your final piece, I'll say.
I would say, know the story that you want to tell, and understand that how that story can end up manifesting itself can change from your initial vision. But as long as you sort of hold on to that, the heart of that story, that theme, that concept that you're trying to explore, it will all work. It'll fall into place because you have the idea, you have the concept, and you know what you're trying to achieve with your story in terms of the characters and the plot. Sometimes though, that can end up, manifesting itself in a different way, whether that's through revisions and things like that. But be open to that, as long as you hang on to the heart of what you're trying to tell. It typically works out, in my experience anyway. So I think that's what I would say to anyone who wants it.
I love that. I have nothing to add because I feel like that's such a lesson to take to heart, of to just write your story and to let it be what it's going to be. So yeah. That being said, can you let our listeners know where they can find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, so you can find me on social media, all the different places, Instagram, Threads, etc. Aleema writes, and then my website is aleemaomotoni.com, where all the links are there to pre-order. Everyone's Thinking It comes out in the US on the 5th of September. So you can pre-order it now, or grab it anywhere books are sold. It's already out in the UK if you're in the UK, and grab it anywhere books are sold there. So
yeah, awesome. Okay, and you guys know that there will be a link in the show notes for this. Her book is also available on the Melanin Library, so if you guys want to check it out, see the amazing cover, get the description, all the good details, y'all already know what to do. There's a link. Have at it. So that being said, you guys, that is it for this episode of the Written in Melanin podcast. If you'd like to support this podcast, then please share it with someone you think may enjoy it. Join my Patreon at patreon.com/CM Lockhart, or grab a copy of my books, We Are the Origin and We Are Dying Gods, from my website, cmlockhart.com. If you'd like to support Aleema, then please purchase her book and follow her on social media. There are links in the show notes for everything. And thank you guys so much for listening. So until next time, I hope all your books are full of melanin.